obviously still trying to figure out, you know, what's the best platform. And so one of the things you can do if you want to in the middle of all of this, if anyone like can't get through or something, let me give you my, you don't have to do this, but if you want to take down my cell phone number, if you got something to write with, it's 847-744-8447. Let me do that again, 847-744-8447. And if you want to send me a text during the middle of this, then that may be another way to get hold, because I'm on my iPad here. For some reason, my computer is not loading the thing. And anyway, so before we get started, Dick, you and I traded some phone messages and never talked, and I think there was some people who wanted to make some statements or observations about how we did this last time and what we can do to improve going forward. I believe that's it. So
yeah,
go ahead.
One of the fellows I'm sitting with asked that maybe we back up and review some of the concepts that you presented out here before, so that everybody could be on the same page, kind of. I don't know if that's something you would like to do, but that request was made, and it kind of made sense in terms of the exposure out here hasn't been as great as maybe it has in other places like the East Coast or Chicago, places like that. We're kind of out here in the Northwest territory. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I got you. I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, you guys could name some of that. So, I mean, I'm happy doing that, but I also, what I was thinking, wait, let me finish. Was there something else? That's number one. Was that it?
Well, that was basically it. I don't know how long that would take. It could take the balance of the.
Well,
we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I don't know either. What I thought, and I'll throw this out to you guys, is that maybe it, because there's some of you on who weren't on last time. People just kind of threw out questions, and we went with it. I'm wondering if at the beginning, maybe those of you who have something on your mind just to start out with, some questions, if we could throw all those out at the beginning, and then go from there, if that makes sense, just an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, so the organizer stopped sharing your webcam. There's no longer visible to any attendee. Greta, did you do something?
I did.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, are we back?
Hey,
okay.
You're back.
All right, there we go. All right. So if that's okay, I mean, for starters, if anybody has any issues, concerns, questions that are coming up out of your life situation, your professional situation, and you want to throw those out from the beginning, and we can see where it goes, I'm certainly open to that.
Well, Chris, this is Susie from North Bend, and I had a question about a coworker of yours that you said developed an abstinence from the expression of anger program using the 12 steps. Can you give me more reference material about that?
I can. And were you the one who texted me a while back or sent me an email after last meeting?
Yes, okay. I am. Okay,
and I thought I responded to that, but maybe it didn't get through. Yes. So the name of the book is Anger Busting 101. And the author is a guy named Newton Hightower, Hightower. And, I found his work, Hightower, Hightower. You can get it on Amazon, Anger Busting 101. And
Okay.
it's very relevant because, I mean, actually, I just got out of having to testify in a case this morning in a divorce case with somebody who had a gambling problem and a rage problem. And rage is probably another word for intermittent explosive disorder. Maybe those get intermingled. But Newton tells his story, and by the way, this will apply to a percentage of the people that you work with. There's a number of compulsive gamblers, alcoholics, addicts who also have what I think we can refer to as a rage addiction. And so Newton he's a social worker out of Houston, and this is his story that he tells in the book. So he was a long-time recovering alcoholic, and I think I remember this correctly, maybe 20 years into his recovery, he was trying to figure out why he kept going through different lives, you know, getting fired from jobs, getting in trouble with the law because of his anger. And finally, he thought, well, you know, being abstinence from alcohol has made a difference in my life with respect to alcohol. So what if I took those principles and applied it to my problem of my rage? And so this whole book is about, you know, his discovery of or awareness that if he practiced abstinence from all expression of anger, he had this brilliant insight that said, well, you know, if even when I'm angry, if I don't act out my anger, maybe I can't get in trouble with my anger. and so, and he says this is not for most, you know, for most people, where it's important, I guess, to learn how to express our anger healthy. But there are some of us who can't do that for whatever reason. And so anyway, that's what his book about, and it's one of those that I think would be well for all of you all to be familiar with, an alternative, because, you know, we don't talk about to alcoholics about managing their drinking any more than, you know, what I've discovered. We don't talk to rage addicts about managing your anger. And what happens is that and I've been using this for a number of years with a lot of guys that I've worked with, that it's about learning a whole new way to interrupt that impulse, both that impulse control, but also get behind the rage to that foundation of fear and sadness and pain and felt sense of vulnerability that, you know, that rage is a response to, which is about getting big and powerful and loud and strong and scary, which is just the opposite of what's going on the inside. So thanks for asking me about that. I mean, we talk some more about that, but I think that's a good question and a relevant issue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Susan, for asking. Yeah.
Sure.
Anybody else?
I had a follow-up question on that, Chris. This is Pete Pennington.
Hey, Pete.
Does he involve, because the group support is so important for AA and the 12-step programs, does he talk about that and how to, like, form groups or bring groups together when you have something like porn or video games or something that's like kind of an offshoot where there isn't a group necessarily going?
He did a lot of his work in groups, and a lot of the work that I've done with Ragers has been in groups, and there was an attempt, I don't know how successful, to form a Rageaholics Anonymous that was based on his work, I think last time I read, out in California. But I would say, yeah, I mean, that's a great venue for it, but I don't know that there's many groups around for addressing that. There's certainly anger management groups and that sort of thing. But I think what I observed him doing was something that was that was different from everything else, in my opinion, that was out there. I mean, when you think in terms of practicing abstinence from all expression of anger, that seems to run a bit contrary to kind of what we've all grown up learning. It's about healthy expressions of anger. And but again, you got to deal with people who are at the extreme where their rage is causing significant problems and they can't find ways of controlling themselves or dealing with it another way. I think he's got a wonderfully unique way of doing it. But yeah, groups are wonderful. There's got to be some way of calling accountability. It seems like half the book also is written to people who are in relationship with the person who's got a problem with rage in terms of how to set boundaries and that sort of thing. So anyway.
Well, I am familiar, this is Susie, with Emotions Anonymous, but I don't know what their principles are. That may be a place to start if they've got phone bridge or some approach that you could hook into and explore. Being out in the wilderness where we are, that might be a place to start.
Could be. I think to me the most important thing is for us as clinicians to be aware that for some people that what Newton's talking about it's really kind of simple and straightforward and very difficult to do, and his book is laid out really well, and you know, I've had a lot of people over the years buy it. I think he's got a workbook that goes with him, so even if you don't have group support, it's certainly something that can be done individually, you know, with you as a therapist. I might also add too, while I'm thinking about it, is that people who are in relationship with those individuals who have a real problem with rage live in fear, a tremendous amount of fear, and some of it may be exaggerated, some of it may be very well warranted, and so I think it's one of those things for us to. You know, one of those other things is just to kind of keep an eye out and to listen for, because the you know, the person on the receiving end of rage may be afraid of saying anything about it. So, and by the way, the rage doesn't always roll over into what could be classified legally as domestic violence. It may be on the edge, but it doesn't have to get there in order to be a problem. So. Anybody else?
Chris, we were wondering if you wanted to talk about the hole in the mountain a little bit as a beginning concept, perhaps.
I certainly can. Let me think. Yeah. So instead of me taking that and running with it, tell me first of all what your understanding of that, what you're doing with it. And actually, what might be interesting is for you to explain to everybody what your understanding is so far, and let's run with it. Because you can listen to me talk about it, but it's only when you name it that it becomes your own. So how's that for throwing it back at you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that very much.
I really want to know.
So I'm ending up using it with clients, talking about, you know, their struggles with money and their struggles around beliefs of the concept of enough, and trying to climb that mountain, failing at the bottom, digging themselves into a hole deeper each time. And so the disparity becomes larger and larger and larger. The struggle becomes larger and larger and larger. And this concept that there will never be enough. And matter of fact, there's one particular client I'm struggling with this concept with very acutely right now. But basically trying to get to that place where can I just be where I'm at and that's enough, and I don't have to win, the concept of winning and just having enough so as not to be constantly fighting that battle.
Yeah, okay. So anybody else want to throw something in before I jump in? Okay, so by way of explanation, and this is usually best done with a drawing on the board. So if we don't have that, I'm gonna ask you to kind of use your imagination. And if you have a piece of paper and a pen in front of you, it might help for you to do this. And just draw, you know, kind of on the left side of your paper, draw a little line, and then off the right edge of that, do a U, which kind of like a hole in the ground. Imagine you're at ground level and there's a hole, okay? And then you get back up to ground level on the other side, but outside the hole, just kind of draw a line up as if there's a mountain or a hill on the other side of that. That may not make sense, but here's where that came from. And this gets back to one of the foundation principles, is that early on, I mean, there's a lot of pieces connected to this, and let me start out, and you guys jump in just kind of at any point in time. But what I begin to hear from a lot of gamblers, and I don't know if it's as true with the escape gamblers as much as it is with the action gamblers, but what I really began to hear was this whole phenomena around the energy around losing, that the energy, there was more energy around losing than there is about winning, which is ironic. And so I began to ask the question, what's the biggest rush for you? Walking in and winning right off the bat, or being in the hole, which means being behind, obviously having lost money, being in the hole and climbing out. And I got a variety of answers. Some would say, well, I like winning right off the bat because then I have more money to play with. Well, that kind of makes sense until you get behind that. And what I really began to hear after I slowed people down and asked some more questions is that there seemed to be a lot more energy around being in the hole and climbing out, or the come from behind victory. And the analogy for that is, I think most or all of us know that the most exciting sporting event, in baseball, it's the home run in the bottom of the ninth to win the game. In football, it's the field goal or the touchdown to win the game with no time left on the clock. In horse racing, it's the come from behind victory. In basketball, it's the hoop at the end of the game that wins the game. So all of those are come from behind victory. So, if you think about that, it kind of makes sense that a lot of people would have that experience of being in the hole, placing the next bet, and climbing out of the hole. And the rush connected to that would be much higher than just winning right off the bat. I also heard many, many gamblers say winning is boring, which is about the craziest thing I've ever heard, if you think about it, until you kind of get in the side of what gambling is. So if you accept the proposition that what most any gambler is doing, when you lose, you're in the hole. When you win, you either fill in that hole some of the way or all of the way, or maybe even you fill in the hole and get out. Are we okay with that so far? Everybody with me? Hello?
Yeah,
yes, sir, we're following.
Yes.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay.
I have it.
Just want to make sure we're still online. All right. So it's kind of that simple. And so if you can imagine the hole as, I dig a hole and I climb out. I dig a hole and I climb out. I dig a hole and I climb out. So it's like a manic depressive cycle. So these were connections that I was making, years and years ago. I don't know, I started making them 20 and maybe 25 years ago or something. And so I'm thinking, well, part of the differential diagnosis for gambling addiction is not better accounted for by a manic episode. What I know is a lot of gamblers get misdiagnosed as bipolar. See, so these are just kind of different pieces of a connection that I started making years and years ago. So, if you imagine then on your drawing, the bottom of the hole just out to the right, if you just write loss, and then the goal of every gambler is to turn that loss into a win, right? And the way you do that is place the next bet. and for those of you who are kind of relatively new to this field, maybe you're real familiar with substance abuse or come at it from a different direction. What those of us in the field are real clear about, and have been for a while, is that the one characteristic of gambling that distinguishes it from all the others, doesn't make it better, doesn't make it worse, but makes it different, is the reality that you can place the next bet and win. And it's important to never forget that. You can place the next bet and win. And I don't care how deep the hole is. If you place a bet and the odds are long enough, you owe $500,000 and you go buy a lottery ticket and the Powerball payoff is X number of millions of dollars, you can spend $1 or $2 or whatever that thing costs and you can win. You can win. It is possible. It's remote, but it is possible. And you can climb out of the hole. So what we say is that gambling is the only addiction whereby you can engage in the addiction and solve problems created by the addiction, which is a long-winded way of saying you can place the next bet and win. So it's important that we all keep that in mind. And you know, you guys have heard me say this a million times, but it remains true. It's why your programs are not flooded with people with gambling problems. Why? Because the solution to their problem is not get therapy and not get help. The solution to their problem is to get some money to place the next bet and win. And if they can do that, then they solve a whole host of life problems. They're not going to stop the car from being repossessed on Friday afternoon by coming in and talking to you. They can stop the car from being repossessed on Friday afternoon by going in to the casino or the card room or whatever and placing a bet and winning and getting enough money in order to make the car payment. That's just the reality that we're dealing with this. So back to the hole. The hole is simply, in a way, I imagine the metaphor of losing money and trying to win it back. And individuals will churn in that hole. So chasing then, which is part of this, which is part of the defining characteristic of gambling, is trying to win back money that you lost. That's the definition of chasing. So the hole was simply a visual representation of trying to describe a number of different pieces of this process. All right, let me pause for a second and see if anybody's got any questions on that part so far.
Just was wondering, as you're talking about this and you're talking about the belief systems of the gambler there with the being able to win my way out of this, just about reference to the fantasy world of the gambler as well as a tie-in for that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So if we do the fantasy reality chart, the reality is I'm losing, I'm in the hole. And my fantasy is that I can place in it, and then I'm living into the next win that is just around the corner. So yeah, integral to that clearly is the dream world of the gambler. But remember, it's not pure fantasy. I mean, it's not pure illusion, because the reality is I can place the next bet and win. But when I'm in the hole, I think what's important is that when I'm in the hole and I'm imagining the way out, I would suggest to you that when I create the fantasy of the way out of this hole that I'm in, that my whole system is supercharged, and so sometimes the deeper the hole, the bigger the rush, because well, there's a lot of pieces connected to that, but I'll also tell you, kind of moving ahead to a different piece, what I also heard people saying, by the way, who had the experience of being in the hole and climbing out, is they would use expressions like, I felt like God, invulnerable, invincible, on top of the world, bulletproof. And you begin to listen to people use that language to describe their experience of placing the next bet or the next series of bets and climbing out of the hole, and you got to ask, what in the world is going on here? You know, why would I be ascribing or using a language of what I refer to as kind of a creator God invulnerable, invincible, bulletproof, on top of the world. You know, why is that happening at that point? So we'll put that piece on hold. But there's these. I mean, you can imagine, in order for me to use that kind of language, something really radical has to be going on in my brain when I have the experience of placing the next bet and winning and getting out of the hole. Right? And even imagining that, the same thing happens. All right, everybody with me so far?
Yes, sir.
All right, so the next piece then is the mountain. And that's on the right side of your page. It's kind of going up from ground level, and I got it sloping up to the right. Some of you, well, you all don't have video, but the ones that you do, here's the hole, and here's the mountain shooting up that side. All right, I think you guys at Bridgeway have heard this, so you're the only one on video. You got it. Anybody else, maybe afterwards, if you want, send me an email. And I can send you actually a visual, like a PowerPoint slide that'll show you that. When we get more sophisticated here, there should be a way where I could actually post a slide. Well, you guys don't have video right now, so that won't work. Doesn't matter. So send me a text or with your email address, and I can email you a picture of this. All right, if you want it. All right, so that's really the whole, that's the whole side of it. And actually, let me say one more thing about that that's really a critical piece, is that what I realized years later, it was one of these kind of one of those things that just kind of slowly dawned on me and, you know, and those of us who were kind of working with this, is that the reality of that phenomena of losing and placing the next bet to try and win is both it's a financial reality. It has all the addictive components, the mood altering aspects of that, but it also has another very significant piece. And I realized that it became a metaphor for dealing with loss. And to me, that's the bigger story of the hole in the mountain. Or the whole part of this is that it's easy to understand losing, being in the hole, placing in the next bet, climbing out, either some or all the way. Where it gets much more intriguing, and I think much more directly relevant for us as clinicians, is when you add in this knowing that many of us have, that a lot of people, maybe later in life, developed gambling problems after experiencing some kind of loss in their life. And Bob Custer, in his book When Luck Runs Out, which is probably the foundation book in the field. It's hard to find, but you maybe find some used copies. So those of you who don't know, Bob Custer, C-U-S-T-E-R, When Luck Runs Out. Bob was responsible single-handedly for getting pathological gambling introduced into the DSM-3 in 1980, started the very first gambling treatment program, and actually was my doctor and became a good friend. And Bob died in 91, but he described as early as the late 70s, when he started working with gamblers and wrote it in the book, is what he observed is that gamblers who've been in recovery relapsed in the aftermath of suffering some kind of loss in their life. All right, you guys with me so far? So we're talking about life loss, which all of us deal with in some way or another with all of our population, you know, wherever they are. I mean, whatever their circumstances is. Why? Because loss is simply part of life. So once we begin to look at this pattern of the connection between loss and gambling, then it occurred to me that this whole process of chasing, trying to convert losses into wins, became a metaphor for life. And there's the great story that I tell about doing a casino employee training at a place called the Rising Sun Casino in southern Indiana. And this was an interesting situation for a number of reasons, because it was a casino that was kind of in a small town. It was away from Cincinnati, and a lot of the employees there, I mean, they were working at the casino, and friends of theirs in the community would come and gamble there at the casino that they were employees. So somebody could be dealing to somebody else that they happen to know. And it created, I mean, there was a huge amount of trauma among the workforce, and we were in talking to them, and the casino higher ups would say, well, we don't want any compulsive gamblers here, and one compulsive gambler is one too many, and we're not supposed to stop them, but there's things that we can do. And in the middle of our training, one of the dealers piped up and said, well, Mr. So-and-so, when my friend was in and she was gambling away money that I knew that she couldn't afford to lose because I knew who she was and I knew her family, and I tried to talk to you about it, you told me to shut up and deal. And she said this right in front of the whole workforce and the bosses and stuff, and a little bit of chaos ensued at that point. But they also asked me at one point about a woman who came in and would put a picture of her son who had been killed in action in the military, would put it on the on the slot machine and she would play. And I use that. I mean, there's a lot of different stories about that kind of thing. Variations on a theme, like the woman in well, let me hold off on that. And they said, well, why is that? And I said, well, here's what we're working on is that it seems to be for a lot of people, it's a little bit different than losing somebody and then bellying up to the bar and just getting drunk so you don't have to think about it. All right, so here's what I want you guys to get in this is the metaphor. I mean, if I'm gambling, I'm engaged in an activity where I can place the next bet and I can win, and by winning, what I do is I undo the problem of losing money. Metaphorically, if I can place the next bet and win, I then undo the problem of loss. You get the kind of subtle but significant shift there?
So,
and the more we played around with that, yeah, go ahead.
So what happens? So if I'm applying this metaphorically, undoing the loss, say the death of a loved one, something like that, I may have that belief system, but then no matter how much I win, it's not in fact undoing that loss. So there's a breakdown in there.
Well, that's right, and eventually that's where we want to get to. And it's not so much me telling you that. And I can say, well, look, you started gambling because, you got divorced and you lost your marriage and you lost your family, or you got fired from your job, or your mother died, or your father, whatever the loss is. And, you're just metaphorically in the, I can describe that to you, but it doesn't do any good. So my job as a clinician is to walk you through this. And the way we do that is when somebody's telling me their history, one of the things that I'm doing is and the ideal is to have your marker board where you're putting their timeline. And I'm looking for critical incidences in their history because I want to know, here's a question, and let me just kind of make this up. Have you ever gambled before? Well, a little bit, but kind of socially. Well, when did it begin to become a problem? Well, it started being a problem last July. Really? Well, what happened last July? Well, I don't know. I just started going to the casino more. Well, what happened before that? Well, my mother got sick with cancer. And, okay, and what happened? Well, she died. Well, when did she die? And many, many times, what you do is you simply invite them to tell you their story, and they will begin to, and you're listening for dates, you're listening for connections. There isn't always one, but I'm telling you, many, many times there is. And so you help them tell their story and help them make the connection between their loss and their gambling. Okay, that's kind of step one. Step 2 is why gambling instead of going and just drinking or taking pills or, whatever else it happens to be. And step 2 is so when you're gambling, why? Why gambling, right? Your mother dies, you start gambling more. Why? Because what I want them to do is to become conscious of what they're not conscious of. And that's simply another way of saying my job, I believe, is to help them tell their story. The real story, not the part that they're telling themselves, but also the part that's being left out either through, delusion, denial, minimization, whatever it is. Because again, my belief is if I can help you tell your story, and like we talked about last time, your story is what will, to use the word confront, it's your story that will confront you or convict you and then free you. And so that's how I perceive my job as a clinician, is to help people tell their story. And it's actually, when you kind of know where to look, it's easy to lead them in a place where they will begin to make the connections. And so, kind of in response to your question, I mean, my answer is yes, because eventually I'm going to say, so when you lose, what happens? Well, I'm used to losing. Okay, well, when you win, what happens? Well, it feels great. Okay, so then what do you do? Well, I place a bigger bet. Well, then what happens? Well, then what happens? And so it's you help them tell the story, and if you're really listening, then you will hear where things go off the rails, and eventually they'll be led to a place with you helping them where they recognize, this doesn't help me do a damn thing. Hey, Mary Lane, got you on video. Good to see you. So let me give you a couple of other examples of loss as a metaphor. There was a young woman in a treatment program that my partner in Chicago, Peggy, and I were sitting in for right at the beginning. And this was many, many years ago. And she told a story. She was a casino gambler, and she'd gotten in trouble for stealing with an employee from her employer. And I don't remember all the details, but it went something like this. She lost a father and a brother and a sister in a fire when she was young. And so 3 huge losses, significant losses in her life. And her gambling, interesting enough, she always gambled at a table. I think she was in Las Vegas or some other, maybe Atlantic City, I don't remember where, but she would always gamble at a table with a female dealer who reminded her of her sister, and all her bets were in threes or multiples of threes. Now you start hearing stuff like that, and it begins to get, sometimes it'll make the hair stand up on the back of your head. Or how about this one? How about the guy who's sitting on my couch? This is probably 20 years ago in my office in Evanston, Illinois. He was a track bettor, and I knew a little bit about his history. I worked with a number of people in the Chicago area who were children or relatives or actual Holocaust survivors. And for some reason, I asked him one day. I said, let me ask you. I said, what were the numbers? What were the combinations that you would bet on horses? He said, well, it would be a kind of in combinations of 1s, 4s, and 3s. That sort of the 1 horse, the 4 horse, the 3 horse, that sort of thing. Those were his favorite combinations. I said, why is that? He said, I don't know. I just like those numbers. I said, well, does it have anything to do with, and I knew his family had escaped from the Nazis over the Alps, but I didn't know the year. And I asked him, I said, when did your family escape the Nazis? And I'm telling you guys, and ladies, it looked like somebody hit him between the eyes with a sledgehammer. He said, "Oh my God." He said, "We escaped across in January, something like January the 4th of 1943. You know, so 1, 4s, and 3s. And you begin to ask these questions, and you begin to hear these incredible stories about how people at an unconscious level are linking this to loss. And all right, let me pause and take a breath there. That's throwing a lot at you, but are you following me? Somebody give me some feedback.
Yes, sir. We're following.
All right. Which then took us to a place of saying, well, you know, this is not just a few people. This applies to most everybody. And so one of the exercises that I think is critical for every one of you to do as part of your practice, and integrate this into your practice, in your packet of information, whatever it is that you give people to fill out, either initially or down the line. Have them make a list of all the losses in their life, both real and imagined. And the reason I say imagined is because what I know is, and you all may not see many of this population out there, I don't know, but a lot of the guys that I see who are sports bettors, a lot of them, ironically, had dreams of going further in sports than they did. You know, I remember working with, I've worked with some guys here in Austin who had scholarships to the university here in Austin, and got injured and couldn't keep playing. And so what happens is their sports betting then becomes a proxy. It becomes a metaphor, kind of a living metaphor for that. So this whole field of gambling as a metaphor is one that I think is really challenging, but I think it's critical to really dial into. All right, so that's a lot about loss, and that's also why, and I think I've done this workshop with you guys out in Oregon called Pathological Gambling, a Morbid Grief Reaction. I may have done that years ago. If not, that's what we're talking about. Mary Lane, I may have done that, you know, down south with you guys in Grants Pass, I think, or at least a piece of that, because I do think that that's something that is necessary to look at. And I can tell you that if you do that exercise of having people make a list of losses in their life, you will strike gold 9 times out of 10. It's that prevalent. All right.
This is Pete Pennington. Just note, for those who have been trained in the grief recovery method, that's what we do in the loss history graph. So that would be like week 2 of your 6-week series.
Great. Yeah. So that's a critical piece. Then the mountain side of the equation. I remember, and I'll tell you, you know, like most of us, this isn't stuff that you know, I sit around and think about. This is stuff that just kind of hits me. So my friend Richard Rohr in Albuquerque, he has this phrase where he always is talking about that which is hidden in plain sight. And it seems to me in my life, a lot of times I'm running into things that once I open my eyes and my ears and my heart are hidden in plain sight. And so, you know, what we're always trying to do is simply find a way of describing what is kind of the collective experience, and then move to variations on a theme. So the mountain side of this equation is, I use his name because I've got his permission to do this, a guy named Todd back in Chicago, brilliant engineer. He and I have talked a lot about this over the years. And he's in my office one day, and we're going through the hole, because he was somebody who kept gambling and losing, and kept gambling and losing and getting in trouble. Lost a relationship, and finally got married, has kids, and is doing well these days, but's had a few relapses. But we were talking about this process of churning in the hole, that manic depressive cycle, the manic depressive cycle that I was talking to you about. I said, Todd, I got up and I walked over to the board and I drew this line up, on the right side, kind of like a mountain, which is kind of the opposite of digging a hole and climbing out. And because, by the way, when you climb out of the hole, where are you? You're at ground level. You haven't accomplished anything. You just filled in the hole that you dug. And I said, Todd, I wonder what would happen if you took all this energy that you put into digging a hole and climbing out, digging a hole and climbing out, digging a hole and climbing out. What would happen if you took that energy and put it over here to see what you could accomplish with your life? All right, now think about that question, because that's a huge one in terms of recovery. And it's a huge one with addicts. Remember, part one and the ticket to admission is abstinence. Part two is figuring out how to live life without being dependent upon your mood-altering chemical or behavior. And then somewhere down the line, the bigger questions are, well, okay, now that I've either claimed for the first time or reclaimed this life that I had, then what am I going to do with this? What am I going to do with this life that I have? Kind of the bigger, both practical and existential questions too. So I said, what would happen if you took all that energy and put it over here to see what you could accomplish in your life? And he was the one that got up and he drew the mountain line up there, not lion, but line. And then he drew a line across it about halfway up. He said, I'd probably get up to about here and get nosebleed and say, fuck it. I mean, he liked using clinical terms like that. And then would take the swan dive off back into the hole. And so that's where the mountain piece came. All right, now this gets a little bit challenging, so stay with me here. So on the whole side of the equation, if you kind of draw a line down the middle of your page, you're losing and you're gambling to win. So to carry that metaphor to the recovery side of the page, on the recovery side, I'm winning, if you will. And it sounds like Charlie Sheen. Was it Charlie Sheen that was always winning? Yeah. Or maybe somebody else in a higher position today. I don't know. But, so you're winning. And he said, well, I think I'd probably get up here, and I don't know that I could handle the prosperity. And so then we looked at a whole different dimension of this. And if you get to this point, it may take you a while to get there with some folks, but what we observed was that I know how to deal with crisis in my life. What I don't know how to do is deal with life when things are okay. And I'll tell you a story. I for the last 4 months or 3 months or something like that, here in Austin, I found a guy who's older than me, which used to be a lot easier to do than it is today. He's a retired Episcopalian priest, and he's a Jungian analyst. And so I thought, okay, this is good stuff. So I went in and I had known him and known about him, and I went into him and talked to him for the first time, and I said, so, here's a little bit of my story, and how I spent 28 years in the Chicago area, blowing my brains out with my own gambling addiction, and landed in Illinois for 28 years, and had all these incredible journeys around through Oregon and wonderful places like that. And, then finally moved back home to Austin 2 years ago, and I said, here I am, and I said, so here's my problem. I said, my problem is that I don't have a problem today. And he laughed. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, for the first time in my adult life, I don't have any debt. I don't owe anybody. I'm in a great relationship. I'm happy. I'm connected with my family. I said, I'm so used to living in crisis as the norm. And I don't have that today. And so that's kind of what I mean. Where I am in my life journey right now is and I said, so my big kind of therapeutic question is, now what? And now some of you may be in that place and you know what I'm talking about. That doesn't mean I don't have stuff that I got to deal with, but it's a different place to be. And I think addicts get normalized to living in crisis. And I remember that early on in my recovery, once I began to understand that, my daily inventory was along these lines. Well, did I do anything to create a crisis today? And by that I mean, did I put off making a phone call that I should have made? You know, was there something that I needed to be responsible for doing that I didn't do? I'm not talking about huge crises like that. I'm talking about from procrastination, and you know, I still struggle with that. But I'm convinced that most addicts get normalized to living life in crisis, and so that's one of the things that we want to look at is interrupting. So my buddy Todd, all right, you guys got that piece? All right. Sound familiar? All right, so my buddy Todd gets up and he was thinking something else. What he was thinking was a couple of things. Was, you know, I don't know if I can handle a winning streak. So now we go back to gamblers talking about winning is boring. You know, now what am I going to do? And you get so normalized to living in a crisis. If you're not, then what do? Well, what you do is you create one. And so what we always have to look at with people that we're working with who are in recovery, you know, how are they creating crises in their lives in a way that is unnecessary by their thinking, their way of living, the story they're telling themselves, living in the fantasy world. So that's another, I think, one of those big themes that, you know, we all get to work with. Just be aware that, you know, that's what any addict is doing. And so why would that pattern stop the minute somebody sobered up? Well, it doesn't. It really doesn't. But there's another interesting piece to the whole, and that is, if you look at the combo book of Gamblers Anonymous, and to me, it's important that every one of you have a copy or some copies in your office, and if you don't have them, find a way of getting some. And if you read on page 10, hang on one second. Where's mine? Hang on. Well, I thought somebody must have come and cleaned up my place because it was on the floor. Right, I knew exactly where it was supposed to be on the floor, and somebody came along and picked it up. So on page 10, there's a whole page called what are some of the characteristics of the person who is a compulsive gambler. And I think number 3 says immaturity, and under that is a desire to have all the good things in life without any effort. Seems to be the common character pattern of compulsive gamblers. That's the something for nothing, and which rolls over into what we were talking about earlier. Whatever it is never enough, which is true for any addict. But then it also says, there's this fascinating line that goes like this. The only place I felt like I belonged was at the poker table or the racetrack or the video poker terminal or in the card room or whatever it happens to be. I'm ad-libbing a little bit of that. There I felt secure and comfortable. No great demands were made upon me. I knew I was destroying myself, and yet at the same time I had a certain sense of security. And it goes on, and so notice that, and a lot of you are working with female gamblers, one of the common themes that you hear is, when I'm gambling, nobody's making demands on me for anything. Excuse me. I'm free from this burden of responsibility. That's a real common theme with a lot of the female gamblers that I've worked with, and I suspect it's true with the female gamblers you're working with. And it rolls on down in that section, says, and so finally the struggle to escape responsibility became a subconscious obsession. And if you take that line and break it down, it's pretty powerful. Finally, the struggle to escape, which means I feel imprisoned and I'm trying to escape from what? Responsibility. And it's so strong that it's an obsession that I'm not conscious of. That's just making that operation. And you begin to find that pattern over and over again. So what Todd was saying is, you know, the more I succeed, if you will, or the more I win, to use kind of some words that don't quite apply, but to carry the analogy. And what I discover is the more and let me use this analogy, the more I succeed at work, the more responsibility I'm given, or the more I grow up, the more I mature. You know, those of you who have children, you give them more and more responsibility the older they get, right? That's just developmental. So the more I succeed, the more responsibility is given to me. And then in my mind, I jump ahead of where I am. I create the fantasy that says, if I keep succeeding, they'll keep giving me more and more responsibility, and eventually I will not be able to live up to it. Eventually I will fail. In other words, I'm winning, and if I'm telling myself eventually I will fail or eventually I will lose, then I say screw it, and that's when relapses take place. All right, that's I'm trying to give you a verbal description of a visual that we draw out. So let me pause and get some feedback from you, those of you where what I just said may not be making sense. It's okay if it doesn't, because it took me a long time to figure this stuff out.
Chris, this is Dick. Last week I was looking at a drawing from about 1990 something, and on it you talk about low threshold, the tolerance of responsibility. Is that where we're near that?
That's right. That's right. So my tolerance for and you know, let me draw on what you know about addicts in general. Early on, how much responsibility can they handle? You know, not much more than zero. It's kind of like spoon feeding. It's like if the best that you do is don't take a drink or a drug or any mood altering experience today, you're a winner. Right?
The vein of our existence is you are irresponsible.
Say that again.
The vein of the addict's existence is you are irresponsible, you cannot be responsible. Yeah.
And the addicts that I work with refer to responsibility as the R word.
Right. Well, and that leads into the inevitability of failure.
That's right.
Because the more I succeed, the more I can't stand it.
Exactly. Or my fear is, and you know, I use a kind of a sales analogy. You know, any of you have been in sales or work with people in sales, they give you a quota, and you're working your butt off to meet the quota, and you meet the quota, and you feel relief, and then next quarter the boss says, well, you did so good, we're going to raise your quota next quarter. And you think, oh my God, I'm already working, you know, 50 hours a week, and now they're loading more on. And if you're in the present moment again, projecting into the future your inevitable failure, then why would you not give up at that point? So it's one of those other pieces to really listen for. So basically, the more responsibility I have or perceive that I have, the more challenging that it is. And yet the reality is that what we do is we intervene and we invite people to come right back to the present moment. So wait a second, you know, get out of it. It's like the person who said, there have been a great many crises in my life, many of which never even occurred. So the opposite of being in the hole and fantasizing the win that is going to bail you out, the other side of that is I'm winning and I'm fantasizing the inevitable loss, or I'm telling myself the inevitable loss that will occur. And if I'm inevitably going to lose, then screw it. Same gambling thinking, just the mirror image. Did that, what I just said, make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, it's so important. Let me repeat it. When I'm on the addiction side, I'm in the hole. The reality is I'm losing, and my fantasy is of winning. And when I fantasize winning, I feel good. When I'm on the winning side, I'm still thinking in that win-lose mentality. If I'm winning, every gambler knows that every winning streak is followed by a losing streak. So on the winning side, I'm fantasizing losing. And when I do that, then I'm going to feel anxious and depressed. Either way, I'm still living in a fantasy world. And so again, the intervention is come back into the present moment. What's right in front of you to do? And that's where, the program language of what do you do? Well, you do first things first, the next right thing, one step at a time, one day at a time. All of those are invitations out of the future back into the present moment. All right, let me pause for a second. There's a number of you out there that are hearing some of this for the first time. So, Susie in Northland, is this making sense to you? Are you there? Or are you muted? Ashley, you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
How are you hearing all of this?
How am I hearing? Oh, it's all very, I'm kind of new to the gambling world. My boss told me I had to learn in rapid succession about this population to deliver.
Who's your boss? Give me a call and talk to me.
David Kors is a lovely soul. But no, one of the things that really comes up for me as I hear it is kind of this theme of right and wrong and good and evil. I mean, not to that degree, but there's almost like this very deep, bigger than kind of life experience played out in the gambling, where it's about it's almost like a purging of their sins, quote unquote, so to speak, every time they win, and kind of that you root for the right person. You root for and it's just, I see it a lot with my trauma folks. On some level, they're just trying to forgive themselves or get forgiveness from someone else. And I kind of see how this, the gambling can kind of play out. And one thing that comes up for me, I just started working with a gambling population, and because there's this right and wrong, and I'm innately bad or innately good kind of human, one of the things I've really been practicing with them is I love the next right action, but something that I've been trying to use is the next indicated action, and take the good or bad out of it, but do the next the next thing that is in front of you that needs attending to, versus using that language just because I feel like anyways, that's all. That's what comes up for me. Thanks for checking on me over here.
But you know what? That's a lot, and I love the way you said that, and I think you're really dialing into one of the critical pieces. And again, I repeat myself on this, but remember that the nature of a wager is two things. One is you either win or lose. It is black and white, all or nothing, either or, good, bad, right, and wrong. And we know that's the mindset of the addict. But with the gambling, that's the nature of the beast. With alcohol, there's not that, I guess you could drink the right or the wrong beer, but those categories really don't apply, do they? But with gambling, it is black and white, either or, all or nothing. And so, yeah, Ashley, you're absolutely picking up on that piece of it, which is critical. And that's why I say it's important to not get too, when we're talking metaphor, we also want to stay really grounded in the reality that you place a bet, and the outcome is certain. You're either going to win or lose. So there's uncertainty in the middle of certainty. So Ashley, play around with that theme as a metaphor for life. And you and I mean, we all know that most people who come in to see us are having trouble with the, what's a good word, maybe the unknown or the ambiguity or the in-between or the not knowing. And there's a part of all of us that wants to know, you know, we want a handicap. We want to know what the outcome is, especially people who suffer from anxiety. I want to know. If I can just know, then I can be okay. Well, guess what? That's not life. So from my perception, the spiritual journey is not lived in the black and white, the either or. It's lived in the in-between. It's lived into the mystery. And so, you know, there is a part of gambling. I've also done a workshop called Pathological Gambling, a Misdirected Search for Faith, where in many ways it's an attempt to try and, you know, find a way of dealing with the unknowns in life. That's what wagering is. Why? Because the second component of a wager, first component is you either win or lose. Second component is the outcome of a wager is always outside of our control. And so actually, when you work with the gambling, take what you just said and add to that the piece of something like this. Let me ask you a question. When you place a bet, when you're playing the slot machine or whatever, do you have any control over the outcome?
Are you asking me, or is this a?
Just a suggestion.
I've never put money in a slot machine, but I would imagine that you don't have a lot of influence over the outcome. Okay, all right. Well, have you ever placed any kind of bet on anything at all? Just like scratch it when my parents put them in my stocking. I'm not. This is not a. Yeah. All right, but you get so when they put a scratch, do you have any control over what's underneath the silver covering over the scratch off? No. Did you put it there? No. Right. All you do is scratch it off, right? Yep. But the outcome of that was not determined by you. It's determined by somebody else. Yep. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what I'm underlining, is simply get that piece and know that that's true of every single wager. Now, some form of gambling, you can have more influence over the outcome. But anybody that you're seeing who's playing one of the machines, those machines are computers that are pre-programmed. You have zero control over the outcome. And so when you walk people through that, they may give you a whole line of, well, yeah, you know, I like this machine because blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, do you have any control of the outcome? No. And then from what you were reporting in, I know you get this piece, that becomes a metaphor for life. Would it surprise you to know that a lot of female gamblers who in fact are victims of abuse are really attracted to the machines? Why? Because it becomes a repetition compulsion. Only it's a seductive one because they're playing the machine, and only in this case they can win. But all along the way, they have no control over the outcome. So they're actually recreating victimization when they play the very, very machines that they believe are going to provide them some relief and salvation. How about that one? Yeah. I don't know if I said that clear, but that's... It's heavy. It's tough. It is. It absolutely is, but I can tell you that's what's going on. And which is why our question to everybody is, what function does your gambling serve? That's a question that we keep front and center. All right, who else out there? What's this stirring for anybody else that hadn't said anything? Brandy, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm thinking a lot about the role that the re-traumatization plays on the folks that we serve here, and it's bringing up a lot of sadness for me. Like
Really?
I just feel a lot of sympathy for those folks who are just kind of stuck in those cycles. They're trying so hard to get that big dream world win, and they keep doing that in a system that's built to re-traumatize them.
You know, and when you said that, I just felt a lot of sadness myself. I don't know if anybody else did when you said that. And what you just reminded me of is that by the time somebody with a gambling problem comes into your office, they have a massive, in my experience, a massive amount of pain. And yeah, I mean, you saying that, I'm just reflecting back over a lot of people that, you know, I've worked with, the extraordinary level of pain that they bring in, which means that kind of as a, you know, as both a self and other supervision issue, I got to be honest with you, there's times where I may have something going on in my life and somebody's, you know, touching on some of their pain, and I'm thinking, man, I can't go there with you today. You know, and then I pray the great prayer of help to be freed from myself in order to be present. But I got to tell you, we work with this population. You're going to be invited into a lot of that pain that they don't want to go to. So thank you for reminding all of us of that. I don't know if you were aware of doing that, but you did. Maggie, you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Gotcha, yeah.
Well, I
Thoughts?
find this fascinating, and as you were talking, I was thinking of all the people I've worked with, which is not a whole lot. We're in a small county, but every single one of them has that whole dealing with loss, is dealing with some kind of loss. And one of them is a woman who had a special needs child, and so I think part of her loss was dealing with the fact that the loss of a normal child, I guess. I mean, she loved her child, obviously, but having to deal with his special needs. But also, I found it interesting thinking about her because her mother was a compulsive gambler, and the only way she could spend time with her mother is if she snuck into the casinos.
Yeah.
And that's where she got her love and sustenance. And anyway, it's just very fascinating, to think about it in that way.
You know what? And you're right in what you're saying. There is what's the loss? And of course, in a situation like that, that's one that's an ongoing loss.
Yes.
You know, that's kind of like we talk about divorce in some ways as a living death. That's one of those things that just keeps going on and on and on. And so what do we do with loss? Well, we grieve. So along those lines, and we're about out of time, but let me leave you with one last thing. I want you guys to make a note of this. A good friend of mine, actually better than a good friend, he was my college roommate, and he and I went to graduate school together, has written just finally published after 30 years a book, and I'll give you his name. It's called, you can get it on Amazon. It's called, his name is Patrick O'Malley, O''Malley. And listen to the title of this book. It's really cool. Part one is it's Getting Grief Right. Finding your story of love in the sorrow of loss. Finding your story of love in the sorrow of loss. And Pat and his wife Nancy and my wife and I and another couple, we all kind of got married around the same time and had our first children around the same time. And Pat and Nancy's son Ryan was born premature, and a few months after he got home from the hospital, he died. And so it's an event that is really, you know, like most of those kinds of losses, shape our life moving forward. And so he does a lot of work with grief, and he writes in his book his struggle with the models of grief that were presented out there. And I know, Pete, you mentioned the grief, and when I was in Oregon last year or whenever it was, we had the workshop on that. So I'm suggesting that you consider adding this book to your arsenal. And it's really along the lines of helping people tell their story, and his struggle with that, and what he kept running into, both as a clinician, but also as a grieving dad. It's a wonderful, not just because I know him, even if I didn't reading it, it's a wonderful book. So it's another one for your library. It's called Getting Grief Right by Patrick O'Malley, O-M-A-L-L-E-Y. If there's, going forward, please, when you have any requests, and I think we did some of, Dick, what you had mentioned in the first, going back and talking about issues that we have addressed before. I mean, these are some of the major themes, a few of them. So between now and next month, anything comes up for you guys, I gave you my cell phone number. Let me give it to you again, 847-744-8447. If there's stuff you want to put on the agenda or questions that you have as they come up, it'd be great to have a whole list of that going into our time next month. So anybody else have anything to jump in with before we sign off for today?
Chris, this is John again. I was just wondering, I don't know if it's possible, but would you be able to have access to a whiteboard when you do these behind you, like something,
Yeah.
just because I know.
Yeah, that's why we shifted over to what am I talking? We shifted over to GoToMeeting, and next time when we do it, I'll have it set up with a whiteboard behind me, so those of you who have video can see that. So feel free, you guys. It's kind of cool to video in on that. So even if you don't, and by the way, if you're using an iPad or something like that, when you video in, you can see me by video, but you don't have to turn on your video camera. Maybe you guys may not have known that, but you have the option of keeping your camera off and just seeing me on the video. So those of you out there around the state, consider doing that next time. All right, thanks, man. I'll do that. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Stop? All right, you guys have a great month out there. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.